Get ready. You're about to experience the life science effect. The most influential players in biotech, pharma, and medical device, bringing you their insights and inspirational stories. Are you ready to boost your career? Ready to set your medical innovation in motion? You have arrived at the right place. Every week, another industry leader, more insights, more inspiration, and tips you can implement right away to make your mark on the world. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm joined by Jason Bork, who's the president and founder of Pintail Solutions and the COO of the Global Alzheimer's Platform, or GAP, Foundation. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Steve, thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being on. And you're just back from an exciting conference in Nashville, Tennessee, I assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because Nashville, Indiana probably doesn't have a lot of big conferences. But back from Nashville, Tennessee, big conference aimed at accelerating, sharing best practices to accelerate clinical research in Alzheimer's, right?
That's right.
Tell me more about that conference and how was it and what'd you get done and how close are we?
Sure. I don't know how close we are, but I'll answer the other questions for sure.
Awesome.
This is an annual conference that we have. It's unlike any other. We're pretty adamant about getting feedback from all of our participants, and there's nothing else out here like that. There's a lot of conferences on clinical development. There's a lot of conferences on Alzheimer's. Those are focused mainly on science. We really focus around operations and how to get things done and how to improve, how to accelerate clinical development. That's core to GAP's mission. In Nashville, we had almost 70 of our sites represented. We had 165 people. We had a handful of pharma sponsors. We had a CRO, other vendor partners that are involved in the process. And folks are vulnerable. They're willing to share best practices. They're willing to collaborate with each other. Even sites that are within the same, relatively geographic communities recognize that, unfortunately, there's enough patients out there. It's just, how do you get them involved in research? How do you get them engaged in research? And working together, we can actually enable that to move faster.
Alzheimer's, of course, devastating disease. I haven't personally known anyone, but I see stories all the time of people dealing with Alzheimer's. And the Global Alzheimer's Platform is really aimed at accelerating that research, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of bad news I don't know if you call it, I'd say disappointing news. Recently, over the past couple of years, of major pharmaceutical companies announcing that their research just isn't panning out. So what is the latest in finding a cure for this disease?
Yeah, as far as bad news, it's all relative of perspective, right? If you sit on the pharma side, which I've done for a long time, any answer that's clear is a good answer, right? But unfortunately, from a patient or caregiver perspective, all the answers have been negative as far as, right, this doesn't help, or it doesn't help enough to make it commercially viable, to improve the symptoms, to prevent Alzheimer's disease, et cetera. There's not a good picture into it. GAP was started by George Vredenberg. George and his beautiful late wife, Trish, started a number of things in Alzheimer's disease. Trish's mother had a terrible bout with Alzheimer's. When George retired from his career in law, I think chief legal officer for Time Warner, AOL, et cetera, in all those mega mergers, he looked at the world and what he could do with his time in substantial changes and improvements made in cardiovascular disease. We hardly talk about AIDS, HIV anymore. Seems like you can live forever with zero, viral titers, et cetera.
I think I saw the other day that a second person was cured.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Or at least they suspect they've been cured.
I didn't even see that, but it seems like they can live today with almost no symptoms.
It's not a death sentence anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And when George looked between, the 10 years of that had passed since, his mother-in-law fought the disease to when he retired, there had been no changes. And unfortunately, since that time, there still really have been, no changes in how we treat, how we can address the disease. So a few comments there, right? One of our prominent principal investigators that, helped shape GAP and helped work closely with us, right? I mean, if he was here, he'd pound the table and say, I don't know if we're one step or 100 steps away from finding a cure, from finding a prevention, but if we can accelerate clinical development, if we can accelerate the learning cycles, we're going to get there faster. Now, there's been an awful lot of, as you said, disappointing news, and from a patient or caregiver perspective, bad news as far as failed drugs. But there has been one success. It's Green Valley has a molecule in China I don't know if it's Chinese only or Asia only clinical trial, and they are progressing to get that approved and launched in China.
Wow.
really for the first time in China alone before anywhere else. And they're also looking at running global studies to initiate most likely in first quarter of 2020.
Why are they focused on China?
That's where all the data is. They ran a study that was either Chinese or Asian focused, I forget, and it wouldn't have the weight to get approved in Europe or in the U.S. But they're looking to run those global studies as fast as they can.
But it's promising as a treatment, as a cure?
It looks like it's promising as a treatment. So
gosh.
again, most of the treatment is really, delaying the progression of cognitive decline. So no, I wouldn't stand here today and say it's a cure.
Yeah.
But it's the first big positive news that's come out in decades.
That's good to hear. I hadn't heard that. So thanks for bringing that up. So we can get back to GAP specifically and Pintail. I'd love to hear more about Pintail Solutions. But before we get back to that, let's talk about you for a second.
Sure.
So you've been in life sciences for a while. Talk about your background a little bit and why you decided to get into the field in the first place.
Sure, great question. Chemical engineer by training, and
I understand you went to an amazing school.
I think that's a fair answer.
Yeah. And as a chemical engineer.
Yeah, so Rose-Hulman. Went to Rose-Hulman, as you know.
The past few episodes, we've had Purdue people with engineering degrees, and I keep making the same joke over and over, and I don't mind making the same joke a million times. I just keep saying it's like, Purdue's a good school. It's like the Rose-Hulman of big schools. But now I can actually say,
you can.
For those who haven't heard of Rose-Hulman, well, MIT is kind of like the Rose-Hulman of the East Coast. So we'll just put it that way.
I think that's well said.
So anyway, chemical engineer from Rose-Hulman. Good.
Yes.
Good start.
My first role, I looked at going to grad school, looked at doing different things. I actually took a job at Caterpillar. I was a research engineer in non-metallics, doing R&D in plastics and rubber. And Steve, I figured out what I didn't want to do.
Oh.
And I knew that probably 6 months into it.
Live in Peoria, Illinois?
Peoria's fine.
Oh, okay.
I enjoyed Peoria, met a lot of good friends, met my wife in Peoria.
My bachelor party was in Peoria.
Mine was not, but
Okay.
maybe we'll trade those stories later.
Yeah, okay. That's a different podcast.
It might be. But I want to be part of that one too.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Okay, so you're working at CAT and you decide that's not what you want.
It's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
If you look at the electives when I was at Rose, it was all focused on bioengineering, bioprocess. It was really focused on pharma.
Yeah.
I took a materials class. We all had to. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. I knew it right away. I don't regret any of it. Figuring out what you don't want to do early in your career is a phenomenal benefit.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Steve, in 2 years, I had two very different roles. But I had the worst boss and best boss in my career, well, until I went out on my own.
Oh, right.
But
now you have the worst boss.
No, best boss, thanks.
Oh, best, okay.
But very different cultures,
Yeah.
right? And I saw what leadership could do in a negative way across an organization, and I saw what leadership could do in a positive way within an organization. And right as my career progressed, I leaned less and less on engineering and more on leadership, more and more on project management, more and more on driving change across organizations.
What's an example of something you observed early in your career that was how leadership could positively impact an organization?
I guess there's probably a few examples. One, if we're staying in Caterpillar, the level of trust in mentoring in that I received. So I was in a job. I was doing R&D in plastics. I got selected by someone who hardly knew me. I'm not sure why he selected me, but he did, to move into a pretty critical role doing R&D in rubber as a rubber compound that went over a friction plate to help the braking system for these large, Caterpillar tractor type equipment. Yeah. And I was almost immediately presenting in front of leadership, his leadership, right? But to the level of trust, the level of commitment they had, and making sure I was prepared and moving forward, it was hard to come by. One of the hardest discussions I had was when I sat in his office and said, his name was Steve actually, and said, Steve, I'm going to leave. And he said, no, you're not. I can always tell when someone's going to leave, right? The work goes down. I can just tell they're not engaged. And I didn't see any of that in you, but I loved working for him, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right. That's, that trust, the trust factor can't be overemphasized. And I think people sometimes misconstrue trust and just think, well, you have to earn my trust first, and then I'll put you in front of my leadership. Well, sometimes I think it works the opposite way, which is by trusting you, he gave you the confidence. He showed he had confidence in you and probably earned a lot of loyalty from you as well, I would guess.
Without a doubt. I'm a big believer in, trust first. Don't be foolish, but trust first.
Right.
And it has played out in particular, one example in my career. I was probably one of the few people in my organization that trust a new leader. And unbeknownst to me, she was paramount in getting me my next promotion, which was a big promotion. This was when I was at Eli Lilly and Company.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer, right? Trust first. Let's not be silly
Trust
about
first.
it.
I like that.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll make you famous with that quote. Trust first.
We're still looking how, so maybe that's it.
Yeah. Still looking for the way to do it, right? Okay, so Caterpillar, you leave there.
Yes.
Where'd you go from there?
Lilly.
Okay.
Lilly. So manufacturing. I was doing chemical engineering.
Yeah.
Really what I was trained to do. And it was good,
Yeah.
but it was closer to what I wanted, but not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, and actually Lilly had a really good program around career development.
Oh, yes.
And Tom Hetty, I think he's still at Lilly. He might actually be at Elanco now. He was instrumental. It was the first time someone talked to me about career, talked about your skills and strengths and whatnot. I had some self-awareness throughout that process of understanding who I was and perhaps who I'm not. But I knew I wanted to move on and do something different. I went and shadowed someone in an organization called Pharmaceutical Project Management.
Mm-hmm.
So it's applying project management to the uncertain world of drug discovery and development, anywhere from preclinical through clinical. Yeah. And Steve, I hardly understood a word they said as far as the language across all the different disciplines in drug development. Mm-hmm. But I knew in that one shadowing that's where I wanted to be.
That's what you wanted. It's sort of like shepherding. Somebody discovers a molecule or some sort of compound that has promise for treating or curing a disease, and then you're responsible for managing and coordinating and shepherding that through clinical trial. Well, could be, one of the things that always amazes me is how complex and how large a project like that could be. So people, hundreds, if not thousands of people will work on that project, and it'll last 10 to 12 years or longer, right? And some people dedicate almost their entire career to the one thing. And the thing that's what time frame was this pharmaceutical project management piece?
I joined that in December of '99.
Okay, so project management was really starting to find its way to a bigger extent, I think, at that time. When I started my career in '91, project management wasn't really something people talked about very much. And then when even probably 98, 99 time frame was when a company I was working for started doing some pharmaceutical project management, but they didn't really know what project management was.
Right.
But they were amazed. They were like, I can't believe we're applying this discipline that you guys use to build buildings or develop software or whatever. Now we're applying it to this, and it's amazing, right? So if 99, they were ahead of the curve, I think.
Well, I think Lilly certainly was ahead of the curve in applying project management. And it's complicated, and it's a little different than construction industry or building new buildings or whatnot. There are so many uncertain factors, right? And not even just risks, but in preclinical especially, we had critical success factors. Mm-hmm. We had to show this and not show that. But what if you showed this at 2x what you expected, and you still didn't show what else you wanted to see? How does that change what it might look like on a draft launch label, right? And how it might impact patients across the world. So I learned very quickly that this was judgment-based, not rules-based. And then I has been very successful within that world.
So you said this is what you wanted to do and you knew it. What was it about that?
I loved the science. I loved being on the cutting edge. I love being able to bring organization to unstructured in sort of unknowns, and how to best manage that and how to optimize that process. I want to be a part of that. I really enjoy working with really bright people working on really big problems. And that's really what brought us here to Pintail Solutions and what we're trying to do and deliver. But it's been fun.
So why did you start Pintail? First of all, I guess maybe just give me the elevator speech of what Pintail is, and then tell me why you started it. What was going on in the industry that you said the world needs Pintail? That's
a great question. Maybe I'll go through my background just a little bit more. Right. So I spent 13 years at Lilly. I did a lot of things there. Did a number of large change projects. Implemented critical chain project management. Literally changed behavior of thousands of people across Lilly and how to look at work and how to deliver work as they go forward. Spent several years at Covance, global head of project management and central labs, and so also a very big organization. But one of my mentors said when I left Lilly, he said, "You don't know what you know." I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know what I don't know. I kind of understand that. What do you mean I don't know what I know?
Yeah, explain that.
I went to, Covance is a $1 billion organization, but didn't have sort of the process or the discipline that Lilly had, right? And so much had been sort of ingrained in me, given the time I spent, more than a decade at Lilly, that he was right. I didn't know what I knew, and some things that came sort of second nature, and that I just came to expect because Lilly ran a pretty tight ship.
Yeah.
I was able to apply and bring some of those best practices into Covance. I left Covance, went to a niche consulting company, Your Encore. And from there, I was asked to be an executive on loan, interestingly, with one of my old bosses from Lilly, but to help something called the Global Alzheimer's Platform. Okay. They were a concept and wanted to build the project management office and wanted to start deliver. And I went from supporting that in executive on loan to being paid by them through Your Encore to where it just made sense for me to take that business and that work out on my own. And I've been able to grow it a little bit since then.
And so that was the Global Alzheimer's Platform needed somebody to kind of run it, to be the executive. And so Pintail became the company.
Pintail became the company that I created to support them. And we hired a handful of people to help continue to support them. But what is Pintail Solutions? Pintail Solutions is really a niche management advisory services company. We want to be both on the thought leadership as well as the execution leadership side. I never want to be the organization that leaves the binder of brilliance and says goodbye and good luck, and most of that stuff never gets implemented. Yeah. But helping shape strategy across organizations, across businesses, and then helping in the initial implementation and execution of that is where we want to be. We're attracted to large problems. Gap in Alzheimer's disease is I'm not going to stand here and say there aren't bigger problems, but I don't know of one when it comes to it. And there's other big problems too that we've reached out and worked with other clients on to help implement solutions and change management processes, et cetera.
Seems like you're pretty uniquely positioned to be able to do that with your background. Do you have other people that work with you who also have sort of unique backgrounds that can help organizations in that way?
Yeah, we have a strong team. We're small but mighty.
Small but mighty, I like it.
Without a doubt. And then I brought on a number of colleagues to help with smaller projects that I haven't had time to be engaged in or involved in.
So in addition to Pintail, you're an Edge mentor?
That's right.
So tell me about your experience around that and how that has impacted your work.
It's been a phenomenal experience. Edge, I'm not going to get this right. Someone may want to Google this and sort of fact check me. But I believe it's really birthed by Jeff Simmons, who's now CEO of Elanco. And he started kind of whole life mentoring within Elanco. And my understanding is, he recognized that this could be bigger than just him and bigger than just Elanco, and allowed it to become its own nonprofit. And so I think it's been around for about 5 years. Dave Neff is the president and CEO of Edge. I think Dave Neff was actually just recognized as top leaders under 40 or something like that locally. He's a phenomenal leader. But Edge is focused on whole life mentoring for young men or young women. Okay. I got introduced to it through a friend, colleague, an old neighbor of mine, Doug Wilson, who's on the board of Edge. And I've gone to EdgeX, which is a leadership conference they have on an annual basis, I think all 3 years that they've had it. And eventually did my own discernment, decided that this is what I want. I want to be a part of this. Steve, being in large organizations, I've had the opportunity to coach, mentor, and develop others. One of my biggest things at Covance was really restructuring the leadership team and resetting expectations for what the expectations were and how we're going to promote into different positions, and really establishing talent assessment discussions and more robust focus on the people, on the individual, which is the heart and soul of any organization. Yeah. Pintail Solutions is still quite a small company, and there's limited opportunity to do that. I certainly have a team, and we've got development plans in place, and we talk about that. But Edge allowed me to get back into that space. So I have a handful of young men from age 22 to 32. That's whole life mentoring, from faith to family to work. I mean, these are guys that have their first job, going through the first job transitions, their first, hopefully their last marriages, right? I suspect some of them will be having, or at least talking about children at some point in the near future. There's just a whole lot of life experience that they don't have that I do, and I can give back a little bit. And it's been a phenomenal group of individuals that I have. Maybe they're all like this, maybe they're not, but I want to be a better person, being around them. I learn a lot from them. They're asking themselves questions that I don't think I was asking myself, between ages of 22 and 32 about purpose, about, what I want to do, what my legacy should be, what, how do I continue to live my Christian values in a secular world. We debate and argue and wrestle with a lot of that. Edge has been a phenomenal experience. I've only been a part of it for a year, but I look forward to being a part of it for many more.
So you mentioned Faith. Is it a Christian organization, or do you mean
Edge is a Christian organization?
Gotcha,
that is
okay.
correct.
And how do these young men find their mentor through Edge? Is it
Edge joins people?
Okay.
They have their own process around how they do it.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
there's a fairly defined process that they have to identify both mentees as well as mentors.
Okay. I'm going to ask you at the end again to repeat this, but this is one I just want to stop for a second and ask you, how do they find out more about that organization? Somebody's sitting there going,
I'm pretty sure
get involved.
I'm pretty sure it's edge.com.
Is it edge.com?
Right.
How do
You
they get that?
can find Dave Neff. You can find Casey Krause. Those are the folks leading it and driving it. You can reach out to me. I'll connect you. But yeah, it's a great organization.
Excellent. Thank you. You mentioned something else that I wanted to ask you something about. It's been kind of a theme that I've been thinking about. And it is, a lot of us in the industry have experience in big corporations, whether it's a Lilly or a Roche or a Covance or one of the other big companies. And there's a scene in Indianapolis that's growing, and it's getting more and more exciting around smaller startups with entrepreneurs, and the universities are doing a lot to contribute to this as well. Another unique piece of your experience is you've gone from the big corporation to the small startup, sort of the entrepreneurial thing. How do you apply what you learned at the big corporation to the small company? I mean, obviously, you're not going to spend as many hours of your day writing detailed procedures on how HR works or how safety works or how your company is run, or maybe you do. I know, Lilly, as an example, spends, and I'm sure all large corporations spend a ton of resources just on documenting processes and making sure that they're always continuously improving those processes, et cetera. How do you take that kind of experience and what is applicable to the small company? Maybe what's not applicable? Any thoughts around?
That's what's fun. I mean, how do you grow that small company without it? That's what I love. I do have large company experience, right? Going back to the quote from one of my mentors, right? You don't know what you know.
Yeah.
I figured what that meant when I went to Covance. I didn't have some of the same processes in place at the time. Now coming back into smaller and smaller organizations, understanding where they're at, where they need to be agile, and what the right level of process and the right level of discipline is I think a strong sweet spot for Pintail Solutions and what we can bring to a number of clients.
What about a client that maybe would say, that all sounds great, but I just did my Series A or B funding, and every penny needs to go to the scientists doing research. I know I need more discipline and process and everything, but unless you're a charity willing to work for free, I can't afford that kind of. What would you say to a company like that?
I'd ask them to reconsider. I'd ask them to think about what have made other companies, even small companies, successful in the past. I've said it before, I think before we were even online, science is sexy, but operations get stuff done. Knowing how to get things done, really understanding what the gaps are between what's preventing you from getting from where you are today and where you want to go. Look, science and technology in the space that you and I are in, and most of your listeners are probably in, is absolutely critical. We know that. That's partly why we're in it. But knowing how to apply the right process, how to get things done, how to optimize what we're doing, how to make the best use of those dollars, whether it's venture capital funding or not, is critical, and it's something that everyone struggles with. And making sure that's optimized and thought through in a wholesale way is critically important to the success of any organization.
Yeah, I suppose in a way you could say getting that funding is, whether it's angel, it's your friends and family, or a venture capital firm has given you this money, getting that money's hard.
Right.
Any entrepreneur knows that, right? And you have to fight for every penny. Why wouldn't you make sure you're spending it as optimally as you can? And so there is a correct amount of process and discipline to apply. It's probably not what Lilly or Roche applies, but it's also not zero.
Right. That's exactly right.
So how do you know you're not doing too much already, right? Almost certainly they're not doing enough, would be my guess. If you're a startup, you're an entrepreneur, you probably work, 75 hours a week, and you're burning through money, and you're just wondering, how am I going to get the next round? And why am I not making as much progress as I should be making with the money I already have? The answers are probably in that science is sexy, operations get stuff done quote, right?
Do you have clear goals? Do you know what the killer experiment is? Do you know when it's going to be done? How well are you managing it? Both timeline as well as budget. All those questions are absolutely critical.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of the parts I struggle with. Because as you know, my employer, BPM, is small. We're small but mighty, right? And our experience is 90% large corporation project management, right? And so we are plugging into the startup, the entrepreneurial scene, because it's exciting and it's where the next big thing is going to come from. And we are certain that our skills could apply at that level.
Absolutely.
The trick is, and one of the first people I asked about this when we were just starting to explore the scene, I said, is anybody going to be able to afford this? And her answer was, nobody has any money. I don't see how you can sell services like what you do to these companies. But what we have learned is it's kind of what you're saying is if they don't know where the money's going for sure, or that it's going to the right places or that it's being optimally spent, it's almost like they can't afford not to at least get somebody. And I get maybe you can't afford or maybe it's not the right time to hire a boutique project management company or a Pintail, but man, talk to somebody. It's like the lawyers I've talked to, the IP lawyers I've had on the show. I've actually said, what would you say to people who are like, I'm too early on in the process, I can't afford a high-priced attorney? Their answer is kind of similar. You can't really afford not to talk to somebody. And what I've often suggested, actually on the show, and I'll go ahead and suggest it again, people like you, Jason, I'm sure, if somebody called you up and said, I don't really know if I have the money or anything, but can we have coffee and talk for an hour?
Absolutely.
Like, I don't want to call it free consulting because it's not really free consulting, but I'm sure you would give them an hour's worth of,
without a doubt,
really tough questions for them. Like, how much money do you have? And do you know where it's going? And do you know, we mentioned the killer experiment. And by the end of that, they would at least know. And with the IP attorneys, it's like you would at least know whether you have exposure that needs to be covered and you need to find an attorney to help you. By the end of the coffee, they would at least know, man, maybe I do need somebody. Maybe it's Pintail, maybe it's somebody else. But
For sure. Steve, I'll go back to something I said earlier. I am a huge believer in judgment-based project management, not rules-based.
Yeah.
You have to understand the client, you have to understand the project, and you have to understand what is just enough. Yeah. And it shouldn't be anymore. A quick story, I was at Covance, and the previous leader of the project management organization, I was in her office at one point, and she said, do you know what your problem is? I was like, no, I'd love to know what my problem is.
Somebody tell me.
Yeah, please. I think I have several, but what is it? And she said, your problem is that your project managers, when they get asked a question about project management, need to give the exact same answer to every single client and every single time. And I said, thank you, but that is not my problem.
Yeah.
Right, let me describe. We're at a central laboratory. Yeah. If our client asks about the laboratory processes, the SOPs, the reagents, or whatnot, the benefit of a central laboratory is it is the same. We have a few across the world. I had a team in Indianapolis, Geneva, Shanghai, Singapore, and Tokyo. And those processes that we ran in the laboratory are the same. The SOPs are the same. The reagents are the same.
Exactly the same.
The project management practices are different. Lilly wants to be treated differently than Janssen because they've got different expectation. Lilly has a different expectation for their phase 3 molecule than their phase 2. Their thresholds for budget variance drastically different in phase 3 than phase 2. And oh, by the way, some of the phase 3 studies are critical path to getting registration and launched, and others aren't. Still very different. If we understand and be a critical partner for them and know which studies are critical path, we can apply a different level of oversight and discipline to the advantage of Lilly. They don't need that for every single study. And so we disagreed, obviously. But understanding the needs, and right, so taking that and from a Covance perspective and global responsibilities now to smaller clients, that's where the key is. Right? How well can we come in, understand the organization, what are their needs, their goals, their objectives, and what's the right level of discipline without going over the top to make sure that delivery gets improved, that they see the full benefit of what they're trying to achieve. How many change management projects or changes in organizations never get launched or completed, or get completed to about 10 or 15% of the expected value, right? When they originally did a return on investment or thought through what the benefits would be. We come in and we help in that space.
I actually had a boss early in my project management career who I disagreed with, obviously, as well, who said, and he wasn't just the boss, he owned the company. And his whole philosophy was that every project manager needs to manage every project the exact same way. And it doesn't matter who the project manager is. And he said it's like manufacturing. He said if you were manufacturing a widget and you didn't have specifications for exactly how to manufacture that widget, every widget would come off different off the assembly line. And my point was, that's why it's called project management, not manufacturing management. We aren't making widgets. People aren't widgets. And we're not managing things, we're managing people, ultimately. I love the judgment-based, not rules-based, because to me, you're 100% right. And being able to differentiate, well, for example, knowing that you have these 5 laboratories around the world that have to, so that the data can be combinable, have to do things exactly the same way, same reagents, all of that. Knowing all that is part of the judgment of a good project manager who knows what has to be exactly the same versus what doesn't have to be exactly the same, and in fact, shouldn't be exactly the same. I love that. I'm going to go back and listen to this episode probably a dozen times.
I'm sure I will too.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's fantastic. Is there anything you wanted to mention before we take a break that I just didn't ask the right question?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll do a couple of wrap-up questions, and we'll be done.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Be right back.
We are very proud to have the support of the Indiana Health Industry Forum here at the Life Science Effect. They have been with us since day one. IHIF provides guidance and leadership on public policy issues that contribute to innovation in the health science sector, deliver therapies to patients in need, and further the development and growth of their member companies. IHIF also works with the government and other groups to support specific initiatives and legislation. Also, if you need a connection in the health industry, give them a call. Go to ihif.org and they will hook you up. They have been a tremendous supporter of ours, so thanks again to the Indiana Health Industry Forum. Go check out ihif.org and support them like they support our life science community. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. We're still here with Jason Bork, who, of course, is the founder and president of Pintail Solutions and the COO of the Global Alzheimer's Platform Foundation. So we're almost done. You're doing great.
So are you, Steve.
Oh, thank you. It's been one of my favorite episodes so far.
Me too.
I haven't heard it yet, but I'm sure it's great. So is there a book that you think might help our listeners that you particularly enjoyed?
I don't know.
Or maybe there's more than one.
Yeah. One of the things that stuck out with me and one of the best and most impactful leadership training classes I had, what really stuck out with me is leaders are learners, right? If you're not learning, if you're not staying cutting edge from a leadership perspective, from a technology perspective, from what's going on in your industry, by listening to this podcast or in other ways, you're dead in the water, and you really need to understand. As far as books, there's probably too many to mention. Good to Great has always stuck with me. What Got You Here Won't Get You There has always stuck with me. Back to Covance, I had an employee. She was a team manager in Geneva, and she's like, you can't get anything out of books. It's written, and it's general, and it's high level, and it doesn't reach out to me. And I said, well, read this one. Yeah. Read this one, and let's talk.
Which one was that?
What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Okay. Marshall Goldsmith, also a Rose-Hulman grad. Gotcha. She came back to me and was like, oh my gosh, it was like he was talking to me. Like he knew what I was struggling with and working through and going through. And
wow.
Right, leaders are learners. You have to be well-read and continue to understand, what's moving forward. As part of the Edge group, my group just recently read Clayton Christensen's How Will I Measure My Life? Right, so here's a guy at Harvard Business School. I knew of him through Lilly as far as innovation and the innovator's dilemma and all the work he's done in that space. But here he is writing a book about purpose and what's most important to you and how will you be remembered and how your best and most authentic self in what you're doing and delivering. That was a phenomenal book. I believe. Not Gates, but Steve Jobs said that was one of the 2 books that every person needs to read. And I wouldn't disagree, but agree about it. And there's countless others, but that's just a snapshot.
I'll put links to those in the show notes. So
great,
people can go check those out. Good to Great. By the way, I've read one of those 3. I'm probably going to have to go read the other ones, especially the Rose-Hulman grad one. But Good to Great was one of the best business books I've read, and I have one of my mentors and taught some leadership training and stuff, I just asked him, what is the best business book that applies the same principles that he used to mentor and coach? And Good to Great was the one he said, which is a little bit surprising because Good to Great really is pretty businessy.
Very
right?
much so.
But when you look at the principles behind what he's trying to convey, you do start to go, yeah, this is a good, when you think about being a leader and how do you lead, get the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats. Don't start with strategy and then hire people to implement that strategy. Hire great people and then let them define the strategy. Steve Jobs probably said, I think it was Steve Jobs, at least it's attributed to him.
Yes.
He said, don't hire smart people and tell them what to do.
Right.
Hire smart people and have them tell you what to do.
Right.
So,
right. Well, I've taken and bastardized one of the quotes from Good to Great, and I believe the quote was, good is the enemy of great.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But good is the enemy of great. Great is the enemy of good enough. In wisdom or leadership is the ability to discern the difference. Right? When in your business, in your organization, whatever you're doing, where is good enough, and it doesn't provide you a competitive advantage. And where is that? Continuing with the words from Good to Great, your big, hairy, audacious goal. Where is your sweet spot, your competitive advantage, and where is good really the enemy of great? Where you need to excel, you need to be better than anyone out there. And so I've expanded upon his quote. With or without approval, but that's what's important. That's what leadership is so important, right? It comes back to judgment again.
He listens to this podcast, so
I thought he might, and so I was going to throw him a bone.
He's going to now know what you did there. I don't know. I try to tell my artist friends, of which the guy that edits this audio is one, that that done beats perfect. But I think we're talking about two different things there. But good is the enemy of great. I like that because if you feel like you're good enough at something, you don't work on it, right?
Right.
But sometimes we need a little reinvention.
Absolutely.
Right? So where can listeners find out more about Pintail, about Jason Bork, about Gap, whatever? Where do they go to find out stuff about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, obviously Jason Bork. You can find me at pintailsolutions.net. That is a website that's still under development. That's my one probably biggest embarrassment, being on my own for 3.5 years and in developing a small team. But
there are a few people here in this building that do
more than a few.
That do that work. So.
I appreciate you pointing me in that direction.
Okay, excellent. Well, you know what? This has been great. One of my favorite ones so far. So much wisdom. I wish that when I started my career, I had worked for you now.
Well, let's talk after we
I could have learned a lot. Right?
I don't know about that. You're being very kind. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. Steve, you've been a wonderful host, and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
You have just experienced the life science effect. If you liked it, be sure and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And more importantly, tell your colleagues, tell your boss, tell your friends. It'll make you look smart, and maybe it'll even get you a raise. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, BPM Associates. Set your medical innovations in motion. BPM helps life science companies design, manage, and execute their most complex projects. What effect will you cause? Thanks to today's guest and to all of our guests. Who else should I be talking to? Send me an email at steven.vincent@bpm-associates.com. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go make something amazing happen.